A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Herman, I was thinking about that old saying about how you cannot hide from the laws of physics. It is a comforting thought, right? Gravity is reliable. If you throw a rock, it follows a very specific, predictable arc. You can do the math on a napkin and know exactly where it is going to land. But what happens when the rock decides it does not want to follow the rules anymore? What happens when the rock starts thinking for itself?
Herman Poppleberry here, and that is exactly the nightmare scenario for missile defense. You are talking about the predictability gap. For decades, the entire philosophy of intercepting a threat was based on the fact that once a missile shuts off its engine, it is basically just a very fast, very heavy falling object. It follows a Keplerian trajectory. If you see the first half of the arc, you know the second half. But Daniel sent us a prompt today that dives into the technology designed specifically to break that predictability.
Right. Our housemate Daniel was looking into Maneuverable Re-entry Vehicles, or MaRVs. It is one of those topics that sounds like alphabet soup until you realize it is the reason why billions of dollars are being poured into new defensive systems. It is the shift from a predictable ballistic arc to a dynamic jinking flight path. Today, we are going to unpack the science, the strategy, and the geopolitical reality of these vehicles.
This is a big one, Corn. We are moving past the simple Scud-style missiles we talked about back in episode 717, the ones that were basically just giant metal tubes falling from the sky. We are getting into the high-stakes engineering of modern warfare. We are talking about objects traveling at 10 times the speed of sound that can suddenly decide to change their mind about where they are going.
So let us start with the basics for everyone listening. When we say re-entry vehicle, or RV, we are talking about the part of the missile that actually carries the warhead back through the atmosphere to the target. In a traditional ballistic missile, this thing is basically a lawn dart. It gets tossed into space by a massive booster, and then gravity and momentum take over. It is a passenger to the universe, but a MaRV is different. Herman, how do you define the difference in a way that captures why it is so revolutionary?
The best way to think about it is the difference between a thrown rock and a high-performance glider. A traditional RV is the rock. Once it is released from the booster, its path is set by its velocity and the angle of its release. If you are a defender, you can look at that rock and calculate its impact point with incredible precision because it cannot change its course. A MaRV, however, has agency. It is equipped with systems that allow it to change its direction after it has already re-entered the atmosphere. It can bank, it can dive, and it can perform what they call jinking maneuvers. Essentially, it can zig when the computer defending the target expects it to zag.
And that agency comes from actual hardware on the vehicle, right? We're not talking about magic. We're talking about control surfaces, like fins, or even small thrusters.
There are a few ways to do it. Some use aerodynamic fins that act like the rudders on a plane. When the vehicle hits the thicker air of the lower atmosphere at 10 or 15 times the speed of sound, those fins can generate an incredible amount of lift. Others use internal weights that shift the center of mass, causing the vehicle to tilt and change direction. And the most advanced ones might use small rocket motors for divert maneuvers. But the key is that it has a brain, an onboard guidance system, often using inertial navigation or even active radar seekers, that tells it how to move to hit a specific spot or avoid an interceptor.
It is fascinating because the environment we are talking about is incredibly hostile. When these things re-enter, they are moving at hypersonic speeds. We did a deep dive on the physics of re-entry heating in episode 1039, the one about the glowing bullet. The air literally turns into plasma around the vehicle. How do you even get a guidance system or a set of fins to work when the heat is enough to melt most metals?
That is the ultimate engineering challenge. You have to balance maneuverability with structural integrity. If you turn too hard at Mach 10, the G-forces will literally shred the vehicle. We are talking about forces that would turn a human into a pancake instantly, and the heat management is a nightmare. Every time you maneuver, you are increasing the friction and the heat load on specific parts of the airframe. So there is this constant trade-off. You want to be unpredictable to the enemy radar, but if you overdo it, you burn up before you even reach the target. You are trying to steer a meteor.
So why go through all that trouble? I mean, if a traditional ballistic missile is faster and simpler, why add the complexity and the massive failure rate of a MaRV?
Because defense has gotten too good. Think about systems like the Patriot or the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, which everyone calls THAAD, or the Israeli Arrow system. These are designed to hit a bullet with a bullet. They work by calculating that predictable arc we mentioned. The computer sees the incoming missile, calculates where it will be in 30 seconds, and launches an interceptor to meet it at that exact point in space. It is pure math.
Right. It is like a quarterback leading a wide receiver. You throw the ball to where the guy is going to be, not where he is now. If the receiver runs a straight line, the quarterback hits him every time.
But if the wide receiver suddenly stops and runs the other way while the ball is in the air, the pass falls incomplete. That is what a MaRV does to a missile defense system. It creates what we call a cone of uncertainty. Instead of the defender knowing the target is at point X, they suddenly realize it could be anywhere within a 50-mile radius of point X by the time their interceptor gets there. The math breaks.
That seems like it would completely break the logic of interception. If I am the guy sitting in the battery of an Arrow 3 system, and I see a MaRV coming in, what does my screen actually look like?
It looks like a nightmare. In the mid-course phase, while it is still in space, it looks like a normal missile. But as it hits the upper atmosphere, the tracking radar starts to see deviations. The velocity changes, the heading shifts. The fire control computer tries to recalculate, but by the time it has a new solution, the MaRV has moved again. This forces the defender to wait until the very last possible second to launch, which shrinks the window of engagement. You go from having minutes to react to having seconds. And in those seconds, the probability of a successful kill drops significantly. You are no longer trying to hit a predictable point, you are trying to guess where a ghost is going to be.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, the psychological and strategic side of it. If you cannot guarantee an interception, the whole concept of a missile shield starts to feel a bit fragile. It changes the cost-benefit analysis of an attack.
It absolutely does. It shifts the balance back toward the offense. It is much cheaper to build a maneuverable warhead than it is to build a defensive system capable of hitting one. We are seeing this play out globally right now. It is not just a theoretical concept anymore. It is an arms race where the shield is struggling to keep up with the sword.
Let us talk about who is actually playing this game. This is not just a superpower thing anymore, right? Obviously, the United States, Russia, and China are the big players. Russia has the Avangard, which they claim is a hypersonic glide vehicle, though it functions on similar principles of maneuverability. China has the DF-21D, the famous carrier killer, which uses a MaRV to hit a moving target at sea. But we are seeing this technology proliferate to regional powers too.
That is the real shift. For a long time, this was elite tech. But now, we are seeing countries like Iran making massive strides. If you look back at episode 964, where we did that A to Z audit of Iran's ballistic arsenal, we touched on how they were moving away from the old inaccurate Scuds toward precision-guided systems. The evolution from a basic missile to a MaRV is the logical next step in their strategy of strategic depth, which we discussed in episode 918.
And they recently made a big splash with the Fatah missiles, right? I remember seeing the headlines about the Fatah 1 and Fatah 2. This was around June of 2023.
Yes, that was a pivotal moment. They unveiled the Fatah 1, and they claimed it was a hypersonic missile with a maneuverable re-entry vehicle. They quoted a range of 1,400 kilometers and a terminal speed of Mach 13 to 15. Now, we always have to take state-run media claims with a grain of salt, but the physical design they showed was consistent with a MaRV. It had a secondary motor in the warhead section and those control fins we were talking about. The secondary motor is key because it allows the warhead to maintain speed and adjust its path even after it has detached from the main booster.
Mach 15 in the terminal phase is incredible. That is over 11,000 miles per hour. At that speed, even if you are not maneuvering, you are a hard target. But if you add a jink or a bank at the end,
it becomes nearly impossible for current generation point defense systems to handle, and then they followed it up with the Fata-2, which looks more like a hypersonic cruise missile or a glide vehicle. The significance here is not just the speed, it is the trajectory. Traditional missiles fly high, then come down. A glide vehicle stays lower in the atmosphere, below the effective range of space-based sensors, but above the range of most traditional radar until it is very close. It is like flying under the radar, but at 5 times the speed of sound.
So, for a country like Israel, which has arguably the most sophisticated layered missile defense in the world, with the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow system, how does a maneuverable Iranian warhead change their defensive posture?
It complicates everything. The Arrow system is designed to intercept missiles in the stratosphere. If the warhead maneuvers while it is still that high up, the Arrow interceptor might miss. If it maneuvers lower down, it falls into the lap of David's Sling. But these systems are designed for a certain volume of fire. If you have a swarm of missiles where even 10% are MaRVs, you have to prioritize those. But how do you know which ones are the MaRVs until they start moving? You might waste your best interceptors on the predictable ones and be left defenseless against the maneuverable ones. It is a shell game at 5 times the speed of sound.
And we have to consider the Gulf states too. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have invested heavily in Patriot and THAAD batteries. If Iran can credibly threaten the moving target or bypass a fixed defense, it changes the entire geometry of how the United States Navy can operate in the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Sea.
If you are a carrier commander, your entire security depends on the assumption that you can shoot down anything coming at you. If the enemy has a MaRV that can adjust its path to hit a moving ship, your carrier is no longer a fortress, it is a target. This is why the United States is so focused on developing its own hypersonic and MaRV capabilities, like the Dark Eagle or the conventional Prompt Global Strike program. They are trying to ensure they have the same offensive advantages.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the idea of terminal seekers. This seems like the holy grail part of the MaRV. It is one thing to move randomly to avoid an interceptor, but it is another thing entirely to move because you are actively looking for your target.
That is the distinction between a maneuverable vehicle and a precision-guided one. A basic MaRV might just perform a pre-programmed corkscrew maneuver to confuse the defense. It does not care where it lands as long as it does not get shot down. But a MaRV with a terminal seeker is a different beast. It has a radar or an infrared camera in the nose. As it comes down, it looks at the ground, identifies the specific building or the ship it is supposed to hit, and adjusts its flight path to hit it with near zero margin of error.
That is the difference between hitting a city and hitting a specific window in a specific office building.
Precisely. And that is what makes the proliferation of this tech so destabilizing. It turns a weapon of mass destruction into a weapon of surgical precision. If you can guarantee a hit on a command center or a power plant from 1,000 miles away, you do not need a nuclear warhead to be effective. A conventional high-explosive warhead becomes a strategic game-changer. It lowers the threshold for using these weapons because you are not just carpet bombing a zip code, you are taking out a specific node in the enemy's infrastructure.
It feels like we are seeing a repeat of the old armor versus anti-tank shell race. For every new plate of armor, someone builds a faster, hotter shell. Are we reaching a point where defense is effectively impossible?
I would not say impossible, but the cost curve is definitely favoring the attacker right now. To defend against a MaRV, you need a layered system where the interceptors themselves are also maneuverable. You need what they call hit-to-kill vehicles that have their own thrusters to match the zigs and zags of the incoming warhead. And you need a massive network of sensors, from low Earth orbit satellites to high-frequency ground radars, all linked by artificial intelligence that can process the data in real time. You are trying to coordinate a defense where the reaction time is measured in milliseconds.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
It is. It is orders of magnitude more expensive than the missile it is trying to stop, and that is the strategic dilemma. If an adversary can build 50 maneuverable missiles for the price of one of your defensive batteries, they can just overwhelm you. This is why we are seeing a shift in military thinking toward what they call left-of-launch strategies.
Left of launch. That means hitting the missiles before they even leave the ground, right?
If you cannot reliably catch the arrow, you have to break the bow. That involves cyber attacks, sabotage, or preemptive strikes on the launch sites and command and control nodes. It is a much more aggressive posture, and it is born out of the realization that the shield is no longer impenetrable. You have to stop the launch because once that MaRV is in the air, the odds are no longer in your favor.
It is interesting to see how this connects back to our earlier discussions about the Iranian program. In episode 993, we talked about those missile cities, the underground bases where they hide their launchers. If the defense is struggling, the pressure to find and neutralize those sites before conflict starts becomes much higher. It creates a very tense environment.
It really does. And it creates a hair-trigger environment. If both sides know that the first one to fire has a massive advantage because the other side cannot defend effectively, then everyone is incentivized to fire first during a crisis. It is a classic stability-instability paradox. The more precise and maneuverable the weapons become, the less stable the piece becomes, because the penalty for being second is total destruction.
So, looking forward, what should our listeners be watching for in the news? When we see reports of a new missile test, what are the red flags or the key terms that indicate we are looking at a significant jump in MaRV capability?
The first thing is the shape of the warhead. If you see a nose cone that is long and biconic, or if it has small fins at the base, that is a huge indicator of maneuverability. A simple cone is usually just a ballistic rock. A biconic shape, which looks like two cones stacked on top of each other, is designed to generate lift and allow for steering. Second, look for mentions of solid fuel. We talked about this in episode 918. Solid-fueled missiles can be launched in minutes, which pairs perfectly with the survivability of a MaRV. If you can launch quickly and your warhead can avoid defense, you have a very potent weapon.
And what about the claims of speed? We hear hypersonic thrown around a lot.
Right, and that is a common misconception we should clear up. Technically, almost any medium-range ballistic missile is hypersonic because it travels faster than Mach 5 during re-entry. But when the media says hypersonic weapon today, they usually mean a vehicle that is both hypersonic and maneuverable. A MaRV is a type of hypersonic weapon, but not all hypersonic objects are MaRVs. The key is the control. If the report says the vehicle performed lateral maneuvers or changed altitude during the terminal phase, that is the MaRV signature. That is the part that should make you sit up and take notice.
That is a great distinction. It is the difference between a bullet and a guided missile. Both are fast, but only one is smart.
And watch for developments in terminal seekers. If a country claims their missile has active radar homing or electro-optical guidance for the final stage, that means they are moving toward that surgical precision we discussed. That is the point where the strategic balance really shifts. When you combine maneuverability with precision, you have a weapon that can decapitate a command structure without ever needing a nuclear payload.
You know, it is easy to get lost in the technical details, the Mach numbers, and the guidance systems. But the underlying reality is that we are living through a fundamental shift in how wars are deterred and fought. For a long time, the United States and its allies relied on technical superiority in defense to keep the peace. The idea was that we could build a dome that would keep us safe, but the physics of the MaRV is making that dome a lot more porous.
It is a return to a more traditional form of deterrence, where you rely on the threat of your own offensive capabilities rather than just your shield. It is a more dangerous world in some ways, but it is the reality of the 21st century. The technology has outpaced the policy. We are building things that our current treaties and diplomatic frameworks are not equipped to handle.
It really has. And I think that is a good place to start wrapping things up. We have covered the mechanics of these things, why they are so hard to hit, and how they are changing the map in the Middle East and beyond. It is a lot to take in. But understanding the how of the physics helps us understand the why of the geopolitics. It is all connected.
Well said, Korn. It is not just about the missiles, it is about the chess game they represent. And as we have seen, the board is getting a lot more complicated. The pieces are moving faster, and they are no longer moving in straight lines.
Definitely. Before we go, I want to say thanks to everyone for listening. We have been doing this for over 1,000 episodes now, and it is the engagement from this community that keeps us digging into these weird and complex topics. If you are enjoying the show, we would really appreciate it if you could leave a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find us and join the conversation.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. And if you want to dive deeper into any of the episodes we mentioned today, like the one on Iranian missile cities or the physics of re-entry heating, you can find the full archive at myweirdprompts.com. There is a search bar there that makes it easy to find specific topics. We have got everything from the early Scud history in episode 717 to the latest hypersonic updates.
And if you have a question or a topic you want us to tackle, there is a contact form on the website too. We love hearing what you guys are curious about. Whether it is more missile tech or something completely different, send it our way.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Herman Poppleberry.
And I am Corn. Thanks for joining us in the Poppleberry house today. We will see you in the next one.
Until next time.
So, just a final thought on the whole thrown rock analogy. If the rock starts moving on its own, I am not just worried about where it lands. I am worried about who is holding the remote control.
The remote control is the most important part of the whole system. And right now, more and more people are getting their hands on one. It is not just a 3-player game anymore.
A sobering thought to end on. All right, we are out. Catch you later.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
And remember, physics is only a law until someone finds a loophole.
And MaRVs are the ultimate loophole.
Pretty much. All right, turning off the mics now.
See ya. See ya.
See ya.
This has been episode 1028 of My Weird Prompts. You can find us on Spotify and at myweirdprompts.com. Thanks for listening.
Signing off.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts.